Hi, welcome to Weekly Dharma Gathering. My name is Gail Spiva. Tonight we're offering part 3 of the Encountering Basic Goodness series. In this 8-session exploration, David Perrin and Dr. Shante Paradigm Smalls lead meditators of any practice level in cultivating stability, clarity, and strength in body, speech, and mind through meditation techniques which draw on ancient wisdom for the contemporary world. Each session consists of short talks, meditation sessions, Q&A, and experiential learning. Sessions are 90 minutes and can be attended live, or students can watch the recording later. David Perrin will lead tonight's session, Encountering Basic Goodness, Speech. Tonight's session will be recorded, so if you prefer not to be seen, please take off your camera feature. Please note that you'll also be recorded when asking the question. If you have a question during the guided instruction or the talk, please feel free to enter it in the chat box at any time, and we'll be able to address it during the discussion period. The recording of tonight's gathering can be accessed within 48 hours via your purchased products on your Vimeo Weekly Dharma Gathering account. You'll receive an email notification once it's posted. And David Perrin's intro. David is a meditation mentor and friend to students, trainees, and fellow instructors. Collaborator, syncretist, facilitator of Circle in its myriad forms, David articulates the multiplicity of meaning encompassed by a modern practice of mindfulness. As creative arts therapist, social venture business co-owner, philanthropist, partner, and father, David is passionate about infusing all locations with the mindfulness 3.0 of our time. Director of Mindful Teacher Training, original head teacher of Mindful Greenwich Village, and co-founder of Mindful Ed school-based program, David co-created the Mindful Certificate and Training Program with Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. Mindfulness that is beyond binary, celebrating multiplicity and intersectionality, imbued with justice and anti-oppression, is the mindfulness for all of us. So, David.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you. As always, you are one of our stalwart hosts, and it's always nice and comforting to come into this space with you hosting us. And I want to say hello to Ainsley. Welcome back. Jeffrey, Mark, Sheena, and David. So wonderful to see you after many moons. Welcome here tonight. Welcome to everybody who is going to watch this subsequent of the recording. I am thinking of all of you and hope that if you are watching particularly this series that Dr. Shante Paradigm Smalls and myself are doing, that at some point this fall, between now and I think January might be the last December or January, if you're able to come in person so that we can see you and practice with you and study in real time, that would be wonderful and delightful. But we're thinking of you and sending you really warm wishes. Many of you are here, you're returning, and David, I'm gonna just jump right in with some things that we've been talking about in this series. This is the third of these classes. So I think it'll be easy to follow along, but we're going to jump right in with a really kind of brief. We'll do 2 meditations tonight. And the first one will be by way of a grounding and a check-in. And then the second one will do a little bit of a meditation a la the theme of tonight's class. But I want you to, without too much ado or particularly like making a big deal out of it, we're going to just go through the 3 questions fairly on the spot. So imagining these as being an on the spot mini meditation that could occur to any one of us to do at any point in the day, and not just sitting or in more formal meditation, but just starting now, even with the eyes open, the eyes could close, whatever you want to do. But first of those questions, many of you will remember, is where am I? So just asking yourself that question right now, where am I? And more than one answer might occur to you. So you might find a few different ways to answer the question, where am I right now? Sometimes what strikes us is big, like planet Earth, and sometimes it's right, very, very local and specific. I'm going to flow right into that second question of how am I? So checking in maybe first with a sense of physicality in the body. How's the body? How is my body now? What are a few things I notice about what's true for my body? Simple noticings and touching in. And either that naturally morphs into how am I doing, maybe in my feelings, state of mind, if I'm noticing something about my mind or kind of how I'm feeling, that the body opens up to or is distinct from body awareness. How am I feeling? Again, brief and honest. And as you make contact with that and notice it, then there's almost a letting it go in the next breath or moment. Letting go not of what's true, but of like a sense of having to hold that. So allow it to be on its own as we begin to shift to that third and last question of why am I here tonight? Getting back online, maybe multiple times today. Knowing a little bit or not so much about this class, about the people who are here, about the teacher. Why did I decide to come? Again, maybe noticing more than one answer, might be a few. Why am I here? And just noticing if it kind of spins off or you don't know. Whenever you feel like you can take a good couple breaths in and out. Locating and releasing. And coming back to the awareness of being together here. So a very simple practice, one that can be done anywhere. Appreciating the magic of just remembering that it occurs to us that we could do that walking or driving, or when we sit down in our cozy chair to read a book or lie down to go to bed. I would love to see if we could have a few shares. It'd just be nice to hear folks' voice. So I'm going to go through the three, and if any of you would be willing to just throw one thing into our communal space that you noticed for any one of these questions. So we'll start with where am I? What did anyone notice for that contemplation?
I noticed I am safe was the first thing that came up.
Oh, good. Thank you, Jeffrey. Okay, and for how am I feeling? How am I doing? What was it? What were any of the noticings?
I noticed a lot of things. A little bit of anxiousness, but also some excitement, and kind of was touched by something that someone shared today. So there was a big mixture.
Great, Mark. Thanks for that giving us the space for the day to almost catch up. Like, oh yeah, that happened. And then third, why am I here? And it's really fine if someone wants to say, hey, I'm being paid to be here. Like David paid me because no one was going to come, and he's given me $15. No, seriously, why am I here? What did you notice?
I had this sense of just a very visual sense of just walking on a path together, just staying on a path.
Good. Thanks, Ainsley.
In company. In
company. Yeah, great. Well said. Thank you. David.
I was just going to say, just joining a community.
Yeah.
It was very, very nice.
Yeah, good.
Because I spend a lot of time alone, so.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I spent most of the day by myself as well. So I echo that, and that's actually a really, so we're going to move into another meditation in a second. But I wanted to just share a few thoughts in there, and you're all pointing to, I think if I would speak a little bit about the inspiration that Shantae and myself had with this series. This is, of course, Weekly Dharma Gathering's been going on for a few years, and there have been these just incredible speakers who come in and share, and there's been somewhat of a consistent audience, and people get to, particularly on that question of why am I here, right? A lot of inspiration each week to maybe take in what the teachings are and fold that into whatever is going on in your practice, your life. And we are, I think I speak for both of us when I say we're both so, we are, inspired by the Shambhala teachings, and spent many years in the more formal aspect of that community. We've talked about this in the last couple classes. So if you haven't seen them, to go and listen to that. I'm not going to go into that as much now, but is to say that, like, the idea of taking the experience, even just of being in that level one. Some of you have experienced that first weekend when people come into Shambhala, what that's all about. And we said, well, how can we take what happens in that weekend and sort of like a little bit pull it apart and give ourselves many months over 8 different sessions to unpack what is at the heart of that training, and basing these first 3 or 4 classes really on the body, speech, and mind, and of course, speech being tonight, and Shante talked about body last time, and we'll talk about mind coming up in the next class, next week, I believe. But this notion of training and what you're pointing to in terms of some of you around community and being and moving along a path, that was, I think many people would say that was really one of the strengths of being part of the Shambhala Sangha and moving along the path that was laid out within that particular tradition. It's not the only one that has a path like that, but there was sort of something special about it. And so this notion of training, right? What are we doing when we train? Well, we're cultivating a natural sense, an innate sense, a sense that we already possess vis-a-vis this notion of basic goodness, right? It's not separate from us, but in some ways we awaken it through practice of what is good for us. What is good for us. And if you're anything like me, we need reminders, because we can be inspired one week. And then I'll be totally honest with you, yesterday at this last night at this time, I was like, I can't give this talk. I had an eruption in my family. My kids were going at each other. I was yelling. I was like, how am I going to give a talk about speech? And I'm yelling at my kids. And so, of course, it's happened enough times for me anticipating teaching that in one moment, I feel like I'm completely unprepared, ill-equipped, and frankly, in an imposter syndrome that happens to us, those of us who've been teaching even for a long time, right? That it's like, get up in the morning, get back on the cushion, and remember why practicing and studying these things is a path. There is an important element of the gradual, as much as there is the incredibly profound total teachings of basic goodness. So the path quality, the training quality, so that we can learn how to make good choices, to be honest with you. And that was the inspiration that part of it that Shante and I shared and we talked a lot about, was this notion of like, we've got to just begin to know how to place our body, our speech, and our mind, because realization and wisdom and compassion and all the rest of that stuff don't have much of a chance if, as my mother-in-law here in Kentucky says, if we're all wabberjanked. Okay, so we're getting unwabberjanked here, and we're going to do that with a little bit of focus tonight on speech. Okay, and that's going to be the focus of our training for this particular session. So I'd like to invite you into a little experiment with this. I'm going to shift my position, and we're going to meditate for a little bit longer. So as always, if you need to change your position, you need to stand. You need to get a glass of water. Sometimes it can feel kind of really radical to lie down, but that should always be a legitimate invitation. And particularly less so maybe for Zoom. I mean, here you can turn off your camera and be however oriented that you want and feel comfortable with, but in one's own practice. And as I practice longer and longer, there are days where the impulse to lie down comes and I follow it. So finding a place of ease. Through ease, we can connect with an integrity of our body. So last class, Shante talked about posture in a really beautiful way, and we actually went through the points of posture. So please do go back and listen or watch that. Enjoying how ease meets this integrity, whether you're standing, sitting, or lying. The Alexander technique practitioners will talk about non-striving. So finding a way to be in alignment where the body can settle around itself. Each one of us has a particular way of coming into the space, and that changes day in and day out in our practice because our mind is different every day. Our feelings are different every day, and our body is different every day. The name of this course is Encountering Basic Goodness. So I'm not so much going to go into a concentration technique, although you may find the breath. As a way of just noticing what's happening as there's a relative stillness. For some of us, ease is shifting around a little bit. Many of you are experienced with coming into this place of relative stillness. If one was less experienced with it, I might ask them to focus more on specific body parts, or to really be with the breathing and to kind of trust that busyness of the mind is okay. It's often why we're not still, is because, oh my gosh, my mind is out of control. Once you've had some experience trusting that rhythm of the body breathing or the heartbeat, coming back to that is like coming home. And so I'm going to offer and drop into the space of our practice here an aspect of focusing, noticing is maybe a better word. So I'm going to invite you to notice the thoughts that are happening. And so you may notice there's no thoughts, it's just awareness of sensation or sensory input, sounds. So those are just noticing of sensations, and we can differentiate that from a thought that actually gets formed. It's kind of a commentary on something, even if it's a sensation, it's a commentary on top of it. It's extra. And as the thought arises, see if you can notice two things. One is, what's the theme of it? What is it about generally? Category? Just say work or family or my cat. And then the second thing is, can you notice a particular quality to this thought? So for instance, does it feel heavy? Does it have a quality of heaviness, or is it like light and airy? Is it a familiar thought or a new thought relatively? Like something I hadn't thought before. What's the quality of that thought? Just noticing as the thoughts arise, what are they about, and what's one quality about it? And so we'll do this for a few more minutes. One more thing to fold in there to notice. Is there a quality of either curiosity or criticism, self-criticism? Which side do the thoughts that have been coming, might they fall and you can reflect back, or you could wait for new thoughts and just notice, is it curious? Am I curious or am I critical? And I'm going to invite you to slowly and gently deepen the breathing a little bit. So we're going to transition by way of inviting some good breaths. Seeing if on one of those breaths you can encourage all the air to go out of the body so there's not a molecule left. Touching back in on that quality of ease that we started the practice with. It's sometimes surprising how much tension will just kind of come right back into the body when the mind is anticipating, oh, we're not going to be meditating anymore. We have to do something else now. Reconnecting with some ease. So that when the time is right for you to open the eyes and reconnect with the space or sounds or the light in your room, It might be nice to, as we did with the other meditation, to just take a short moment to hear from a few of us. What's one thing you notice with this exercise? What did you notice happen for you as you were going along with this, or not, or resisting it?
I thought it was kind of fun to be able to focus on the thoughts as opposed to constantly dissolving them with breath. It was sort of like, I felt like I had permission to sort of goof off in a weird way, meditation wise, because so much of the instruction is about letting the thoughts go and touching on them, but not. There was something really kind of different about really observing them closely.
Good. Thank you, Ainsley.
When I meditated earlier, I was reminded of something which came up again today, which is just this quality of I'm not thinking, my thoughts are thinking me. That, like, it was just so interesting the degree to which these things were like coming out through different windows. It was just like different from everywhere. So yeah, great, Mark. It's a little bit like you're inspiring me to on a Halloween costume, I think. Gail, you were coming in?
Yeah, I felt challenged about, okay, I'm seeing this thought and then not chasing after it and thinking more thoughts about the thought.
Yeah,
that was challenging for me.
Yeah. Thanks for naming that. I think, connected to what Ainsley was said, that of course, in the more traditional shamatha instructions, whatever tradition that might have come to you by the instruction often is that we may notice ever so briefly, but really the encouragement is to pretty immediately come back to the object of meditation. Often that's the breath, in any kind of concentration technique, but particularly in shamatha, there's a way in which we are using the concentration technique to establish a relationship with ourselves where there's a quality of non-struggle, you might say. We're becoming familiar with something about ourselves that maybe, to invoke Mark's comment, is, at least different, if not more than, at least different than, gosh, this thought is, coming at me here, and this is coming here. And sometimes you hear teachers say, right, like, you are not your thoughts. And so, so the impetus really is that way. But I'd like to share a few thoughts with you all tonight, as a way of thinking about speech in particular. In more traditional teachings, you often hear the expression, the three gates of body, speech, and mind. And one of the things that meditation does particularly is that it's talked about as binding these three together. I really love the word synchronizing, because that speaks to me in a way, like, it just intuitively makes sense to me, what it means to feel synchronized in my body, as opposed to not synchronized, like maybe the kind of Wabberjanked quality of just like disjointed. I don't know if any of you have had that feeling of like, it's almost like the head's not attached to the body, or the body is just doing its own thing. And so we're coordinating ourselves, right? That is in this lineage of teachings, this notion of becoming coordinated so that we are in a sense, we are connecting with our wholeness, connecting with the stability and clarity and strength that Gail mentioned as part of the introduction, right? That those inherent qualities of the mind are more accessible to us. We're more aware of that potential of our wholeness, or our basic sanity is another expression that is used, when we feel somewhat coordinated, which is often what meditation is helping to do, is to coordinate us. And so that I might connect that back to this notion of training and being with a group of people and being with teachers and studying a particular, through line of teachings. This training, right, is in some senses an antidote to special interest, living in special interest world. And living, and that is, as we know, so much of what we're all facing and navigating is this notion that at our fingertips is information about anything, and we are encouraged in this system, in this kind of free market capitalist system. It is like a fundamental to that is the notion that each of us feels that we have access to whatever we want. That's kind of the attitude that we have these unlimited choice, and that as long as the structures of society are set up so that there's a protection of a kind of free will, whatever that means to any given person, right? That there's the freedom to choose, and then there are the choices that are made available to us. The notion of training is a little bit like sidelined, or, well, why would you restrict yourself in that way? So what it means to take the posture, to come into the practice, and to bind together, and make a really honest relationship. Like, it's very beautiful the way each of you has shared just tonight in little tidbits, right? We're all Zoom. Not everyone knows each other that well here, but there's still that willingness to be honest with ourselves in our own practice, and then also to share with each other. And that goes so far, that kind of honesty and willingness to say, this is what's true for me. It's why I was honest with you about yelling at my kids, because they were fighting with each other and it was driving me bananas, and I just wanted them to go away. And I, made a gesture as such because I had reached my limit, right? So that was very honest, and there was a lot of like reflection that had to go into after that, after everything, the storm settled, and say, what did I regret about that in terms of how I lost I flipped my lid. I kind of lost my seat. So I want to spend a moment just kind of reviewing the three areas that Shantae invoked in the last class about body. And so Shantae talked about the physicality of body, the energetic quality of body, and the relational quality. And I found those to be so helpful in understanding the different dimensions, the multidimensionality of what we even think of as the body, right? Like it, that the body may be way more than what we are currently familiar with, or what our ideas or concepts of that are. And so speech is the same. Of course, the physicality of speaking, right? That there's a, you know, this wind, this air that passes through the passage of the windpipe, the reverberation, like the vibrations that not only that we're making, but that also our body is sensing, right? So our body is both has these, you know, kind of acoustical qualities to be able to resonate. There's all sorts of different resonators in the face that resonate at different frequencies. So the frequencies that resonate in the forehead, and this is what singers and actors are trained in, are very different than the ones that resonate just a little bit lower down in the region of the nose versus the chest versus the belly. So the body is this giant resonator, and then we are also receiving physically those less so in Zoom, but this is one of the things, of course, that we're all craving, is to be in person so that we can feel the physicality of that resonance, because we're missing that. That is something that can't be replicated in this format. Energetically, this is one that has been really up for me recently, and I'll share a story in a moment. But the tagline for this is that how we say something, how we utter speech, is as important as what we're saying. How we're saying something is as important as what we're saying. So for me, this has come up in a very close relationship in my life recently, with someone who asked me to offer feedback on a creative project that this person was doing. So they had me sit with this project, and then the time came to give the feedback, and there was something that was really triggering about the project for me. It's hard to go into the details because we all know each other, and then someone's going to be like, oh, I know what he's talking about. Suffice it to say that there was something triggering, and without being fully conscious of what had been triggered in me, like all the feelings and all the emotions, because it's really complex and complicated, and I have a long-standing relationship with this person. So there was a way in which, because I kind of bubbled up and the energy got bubbled up, and what I thought, my idea was, well, I need to just say this one thing that's really triggering, because like that's the most important feedback. There's a lot of energy there, and it's important that they hear that, and that's really honest. So I had this notion that if I'm being really honest, because I typically am the kind of person with feedback, I'll like do all the, you know, things that I appreciate and the things that are good and that I like, you know, 3 positive things for 1 constructive critical thing, right? I'm all about that formula. But here, in the name of honesty, I went right at the constructive feedback. The person was really taken aback. I mean, they received it, but what subsequently came out was that it wasn't so much what I said, because they appreciated the critical feedback. It was how I delivered it. This notion, what came across as really sharp. Remember when I was asking you all to observe some qualities about your thoughts? So the quality of the speech was sharp. It was, it seemed to be coming from a place of like, I knew something that that person didn't know. There was a kind of urgency to it. And it didn't include what ultimately came out that they really needed, which was a lot of love and support for just putting this thing out in the world, right? So there was no way in which I forgot to, check in with like, well, so what is it that would be really helpful as we enter into this discussion of me offering this feedback? Like, can I just check in and say, like, how would it be helpful for me to begin? Where would you like me to go? I have different thoughts. And none of that happened because I had been triggered. So even though the content was coming from a place of honesty, the how it was delivered conveyed a whole lot of things about my own mind. And this gets to the relational. So we move from the energetic to the relational. The relational quality of speech is that speech is an expression of mind. Which means that whatever attitude, whatever way we've been triggered, whatever feelings are going on, often information that we can find in the body, speech carries those forward, puts it out into the world, takes that energy and makes relational connections or severs them. And we know it's intuitive, right? To all of us that whether it's like sloppy speech, gossipy type speech, whether it's hate speech that is not, I'm not worried any of you are going to get out of this class and go start hate speeching people on Twitter. Well, Mark, I'm a little worried about you. No, I'm just kidding. Or this kind of like desirous speech of like, I want this thing. And you all know from practice, right? If you have a thought in your mind of something that you want or you're desirous of, that's the headwaters. That's the tip of the, that's the origin of the river. And as those thoughts meet other thoughts, as Ainsley was, saying, or Gail, you were saying, like this notion of like, it's hard for one thought to not lead to the next thought. And then all of a sudden we have a rushing river that eventually ends in a waterfall, which drops into that pool. And the deed has been done, friends. Thoughts lead to speech, leads to action. And those actions create the attitude or create the mindset that leads to the next thought. So I'll say that again. The thought is expressed often through speech, kicks into, it creates a particular action, let's say relationally. And then the effect of that is that it influences our mind for the very next time that we are choose your own adventure. I mean, whatever scenario we're in. So how do we work with this? I want to just offer a few ideas on how to work with this before we open it up into conversation. The first step has a lot to do with what the practice was tonight, which is can we be aware of the thought as we're speaking it? I'm saying this is step one, and it's also like one of the most advanced practices I've ever encountered in my life. Like, no joke, this is so advanced because I personally find my ability, like when I'm quiet, I can tune into what's going on with my mind and my body sometimes. But when I'm talking to other people, I'm in conversation or dialogue, it is really a great practice to have a sense of what it is I'm going to say, like maybe right before I'm going to say it, so that there's some choice involved. Which is why this is such an interesting practice to do even before we talk, because we're talking to ourselves all the time. Let's just be honest. And so even that notion of, am I being curious about what I'm thinking, or am I being critical? And like, just the willingness to be honest about, gosh, I'm talking to myself quite harshly. Of course, we have no patience for people who use harsh speech, because we're still making our own relationship to ourselves about that. If we had some sense of kind of equilibrium, or even making peace with our own negative self-talk, I'm convinced that the natural outgrowth of when we notice that in other people, there would be compassion. So step one, becoming aware as we speak. The next step is, when we're talking, that we make choices. And some of you are familiar with nonviolent communication. Some of you are familiar with community agreements. Some of you, I've been in communities and sessions where we went through community agreements, or you could say establishing norms for how to be together. And as many of you who've done this know, often there are these, what's offered as an agreement among the group is to speak respectfully, is to listen when you're listening, and speak when you're speaking. And when you're speaking is to use the I perspective. Because again, not an easy practice. I'm always blown away by the number of people who are very conscious and who have done a lot of meditation, who then, when there's a group discussion, can't get out of saying you. When you're attending a class and you really don't like what the lecturer is talking about, and you just want to, you want to have dinner. And I'm as guilty as anyone of that instinct of deferring from myself to the you. So making that choice of I am so honored to be with you all, and I am hopeful that these are helpful ideas, and that nonviolent communication, that type of communication becomes a conscious choice. And so that we are, that there's a sort of virtue in our speech. And what that virtue is doing is it's binding the three gates together. That's what the virtue is doing, is it's binding together body, speech, and mind, so that we can make the kind of choices we want to make. And here's a third and last one. This one actually could be a whole workshop, and someday I'll give this workshop, but I want to just give you the teaser for it, which is the idea of practicing visualizing when you speak, visualizing what the words actually mean. So the fun way to imagine this exercise is if you, I would do this with my kids when they were younger, when I would read them a picture book, right? They have the pictures in front of them when I'm reading the words, but I would not look at the pictures. I'm just reading the words, and I'm visualizing what those words are. So for instance, if it was, Mary put on her raincoat and went outside with her polka dotted umbrella. Now, you'll know you're doing this when the kids are completely enraptured by what you're saying. Because if you're visualizing, and this is the secret sauce to people who are really good, particularly performers like actors or storytellers, the ones who are really good are the ones who are seeing everything that they say in their imagination. Because if they see it, then you are in that world with them. And you know, even if you're not seeing everything, it becomes a three-dimensional experience. And that's a synchronization of speech and mind. And so even just something as simple as saying the two words, basic goodness. And you can try that now. Why don't each of us, and we don't have to come off of mute to do this, but just either in your mind, you can say that, or you can actually say it out loud. You can close your eyes if you want. And whatever connotation or whatever comes up for you when you say the word, and you can do it really slow, basic goodness. And then the really fun place to take this is to think about this synesthesia. That means when one sense is evoked by another sense. So for instance, when speech and sound evokes a color or a visual, that's an example of synesthesia. So this can begin to happen in speech, because when I say basic, I might have a physical sensation of that. I might see an image. I might even actually have a taste. Goodness. Quality of ease for me saying that. Okay, I'm going to invite anyone who is, if you have a question or a comment, or I was going to read you all a poem. We'll see if there's time for that, but for now we can just see if there's anything you're thinking about.
David, I'm curious about, you talk about speech coming from thought, which comes from mind. But when you're describing that story of being sort of triggered in advance of speech, it makes you realize that it also comes from your body, from your sort of physical body. So what could you have done in that moment when you're sort of in your body and not so much starting with the mind? How do you sort of, because I have situations like that where I'm sort of triggered, and then it becomes really hard to communicate in that thoughtful way.
Yeah. No, Ainsley, that's a really good point. You know, I guess from my experience, I mean, I'm taking in what you're saying, because I do think that there's a way in which sometimes the body responds even before there's a mental cognition. I mean, for, you know, the kind of like do no harm approach is that unless there is an awareness, like there's an understanding of what's happening in the body, then probably it's not the time to communicate. That certainly was the case for me, is like when I was having that visceral response and that physical response, it was actually, it should have been a wake up call to be like take a moment,
Right.
or to say, hey friend, I'm having a really physical reaction. Can we be in a space of inquiry?
Hmm.
But what I did was I was like, I'm having a physical reaction. And I really need to be honest with you. And so there was an assertion that got made out of that. And actually when we talked about it later, that was one of the things that the friend said, was like, there wasn't any kind of inquiry.
Hmm.
And triggering and being in triggered spaces, or like traumatic spaces, that often is the quality of it, is like, there's no inquiry, there's no gray zone. It's just like, I'm going to go right at the thing, because I'm basically kind of freaked out that if I don't act or I don't communicate, that there will be some repercussions to that. Now, I have seen it in certain situations that if someone is really aware of like what's happening in their body and they have previous experience with that, that person can speak from that place.
Mhm.
It's not to say you can never speak from a triggered place. It's just to say that I think it takes a little bit of experience being in that place to be able to use nonviolent communication. Because most often it is somewhat violent when someone is triggered or there's upset in the body. We're just not that familiar with being in an upset body and being in a relation, you know, the kind of relationships we want to be in, rather than just like overriding something or getting totally freaked out and running. You know, some people run. Is that helpful? Yeah.
Yeah, when I think of triggered, I think of the need to defend, right? The two for me are very closely linked. So if something is triggering for me, I lose my equanimity, and it's almost that primal response of either defense or, you know, and it can be psychological, it can be much more so than physical for me. Then you know, I need to know, right? I don't like to feel out of my depth, even, or, you know, those things simple things can be triggering, and then the response is harmful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what you spoke to has been such a valuable part of my practice, which is when I feel that in my body, in communication, especially in speech, I try, I practice, not always successfully, ceasing my speech, and trying to take a couple more breaths, right? Because otherwise it's inevitable that I will have to assert my, you know, my superiority or my defensiveness, right? I mean, that's been something I've heard my whole life. Oh, why are you so defensive? And yeah, there's the question, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for speaking to that.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeffrey. It's really, it's a beautiful articulation and framing of yeah, I think exactly what we're talking about. And it makes me, and what you're saying, what I'm learning from what you're saying is just a deeper appreciation for the kind of like these personal constructs and the conditioning that is in place that does get kicked up, right? Sometimes it's really thick. And, you know, what I want to be really careful about is to say that the energy that's moving through the body when we do get triggered, like that's information. And you were by no means saying like shut down the information. I think you were just saying like be sophisticated about engaging in communication in that moment where basically what's happening is like you're getting just shock waves of information about this thing that I you know, I'll put it in my own words, that I feel so personally about. And actually in this instance, it was an incredible learning experience. It happened, to even be more honest, it also happened with a meditation student of mine who said something within like the same week. It wasn't a good week, let me tell you that. The same week, this person said, same exact feedback. It wasn't the what of what you said to me, it was how you said it to me that felt so hurtful to me. And again, you know, it was devastating to hear, but actually released a lot of energy within my system, because I realized that there was like there was certain constructs in both cases that I was holding very tightly to. Deep like self-identity stuff, like this is who I am, this is how I communicate. And this person saying, yeah, well, that actually was really hard for me to receive. So the mirror that showed to me around what my own preconceptions, my own attitudes, was just like, forget it. Like even the best therapy, I mean, maybe the best therapy, they would do that for you. But when you're in a situation in real life where it's not a therapist who's telling you, hey, that really affected me in this way. Wow. If to be able to receive that, which testament to my practice, I could, right? There was just enough non-defensiveness for me to be like, okay, I'm hearing that. Take responsibility for that. Let me sit with that for a while.
I'm curious where listening might fit into this discussion of speech.
Yeah, I think I think it's everywhere, really, Gail. I think it's a really great, it's almost like synonymous with the speaking, and to be honest, is why the meditation, why I led it that way, was to notice the way we're speaking to ourselves, the way our thoughts are going, and we are, you know, I like to think about, I've heard very smart people talk about the differences between listening and hearing. So what has come of that for me is to realize how often that I'm listening, usually passively listening, and not hearing. And so that meditation was like an encouragement to, okay, hear it. And this is actually sometimes, I think, a little bit of the pitfall of meditation. I'm all on board with the technique. And in fact, next month in November, just as a preview, we're going to really dive into shamatha. So this has all been building blocks for getting into shamatha, which I think is great, because sometimes you just jump into shamatha and you're thrown into the deep end. I don't know if any of you have that experience, but this is all preparation just to even get to the shamatha instruction. So this notion that we could actually hear what's going on and taste or touch or have that synesthetic experience of like, okay, I'm listening, self, like I'm listening to what's going on. And then, again, going back to what Mark said, I love this notion as I hear it, and now I'm going to put words in your mouth, Mark, which isn't fair, but it's like, is that even me talking? Like, who's talking? And I think sometimes we have that, and it's almost like a little bewildering in real life, right? We listen to our thoughts and then we say, is that me? Am I talking to myself that way? Right? So this is so, and then you do meditation, you're like, come back from your thoughts, come back from your thought. Well, maybe you should actually hang out with that person for a moment so they don't freak you out so much. So it's really just to the other side of the coin. That's a good observation, Gail. Mark, you were coming in.
Yeah, I actually was on the same on a related point. Because today I was actually looking at a quote by Trump on stillness and dignity, and I thought about how I'm often speedy and I struggle sometimes when people are really slow. That I'm like, and what it struck me, and it was this idea of dignity and like what dignity was, and that it's not aloofness, that there's a kindness and a receptivity. And then what it struck me is that there's a inner being, or it relates to listening in this quality of like, when I think about your story of being upset, is just like realizing that your speech, it's not just me. Like it is that my speech relates, that there is a quality of inner being to my speech that I need to think about, that we are together, kind of one, we are an organism here tonight. And that kind of how thinking about how my speech plays with all of this, or with this person, and it just kind of thinking about how to be with people, and how to speak with, as opposed to speak at, I suppose, is what I might say.
Yeah, that is great. I highly recommend moving to the South to practice that, which I've done. I'm not in the deep South, but I'm enough in the South that as a New Yorker, I would look at people like agape. And I would go after the conversation, I would go to Anne and say, what just happened? That was like 25 minutes. I would have done that in like 110 seconds in New York. So that is just kind of obviously a little humor around, what you're saying. I mean, I think you in some senses are almost like taking the whole thing to the next level, which is to say, or maybe and what I'm hearing you say with interbeing, Mark, is this notion of like, when we're practicing speaking with or being with someone in an exchange, that actually we can begin to glimpse basic goodness. Because we don't, there's less of a fixation on where I begin and end and where you begin and end, which is very much what I think, so then maybe the wild thing to leave us with tonight is this notion that all speech is basic goodness, even hate speech is what it is. I'm not saying that it should be condoned or supported or not answered. Absolutely. But in order for us to have that response, there needs to be, or there is the opportunity to have as a first response, how are we in a shared experience right now? Because what the hate speech does is it immediately pushes the habitual response is, right? It pushes me right away, which is what the intention is to create separateness and otherness. So if I get pushed away and I feel pushed away, or I feel triggered by a form of hate speech, then it has been effective. That's what it was designed to do. And it has knocked me off of my seat of understanding what the kind of shared interbeing is, because there is, even as someone is trying and their damnedest to say that there's not, the perspective of basic goodness is that there is that shared interbeing, whether the speech is kind or nasty. And that's why, again, I'm so honest about last night when that squabbling between particularly my two sons, and they were treating each other so poorly. And I was just like, like I failed as a father. You guys are being so mean to each other. So that was that impetus to just other, like me, I'm the dad, you're the kids, I did a bad job, you guys are hating, like it was all around us. And very triggering. So again, it was getting back on the cushion with that willingness to be reflective with myself so that I could come back into a place to be able to see them as part of a bigger whole, and to see and to imagine back into the kind of connection that I wanted to have with them. And it actually happened right before class. I was able to go and have a very loving conversation, a hard one, but a loving conversation with my older son, Reese. And in a way that I couldn't do last night because I just got cut off. I got severed from that, through the speech, through that triggering aspect of it. So again, the basic goodness it's really hard to wrap our minds around it, but it starts at not right versus wrong. It starts at how we are all connected, no matter what the manifestations of people's speech or behavior or thoughts is. And so then speech becomes a gate, just as body and mind is a gateway into, as we synchronize these things, it's a gateway into exactly what you're saying, Mark, that shared basic meaning, a shared, as it is, the goodness, that the dignity and worthiness of all sentient beings is not diminished. Even in the most heinous of situations, it cannot be extinguished. Maybe it diminishes, but it can't be extinguished. Okay, I think that is a good place to pause for now, to close out. So just wanting to really appreciate each one of your good hearts and your capacity to hear. It's what makes sharing, I think, and being together is like the safe space. Jeffrey, you mentioned in the beginning, is like that there's hearing, that we're hearing each other. And that is an essential quality for any kind of teachings to come forward, any sense of camaraderie, community, and certainly for each of us to be that much more fortified on our path. So thank you for fortifying my path and for fortifying each other's paths. And I know that Gail's going to say something in closing here, but really want to encourage you again, whether you're, even if you're not here with us, you're watching this subsequently, please do join Shante Paradigm Smalls next week and next month for a deeper dive into shamatha. It was, yeah, it's just an exciting process to be together in this with you all. So thank you.
Thank you, David, so much. I just want to go and express my own appreciation for your willingness to really show up and be as vulnerable as you were tonight. Thank you. So to close on out, thank you everyone for joining us for tonight's online Dharma gathering. Please join us next week, as David was saying, for the weekly Dharma gathering, Encountering Basic Goodness Part 4, Mind, with Dr. Shante Paradigm Smalls. Also, consider becoming a subscriber if you are not already. We have a 7-day free trial that you can find on our website, and tell your friends. In addition, make sure to follow us on Instagram at Weekly Dharma and on Facebook, and not getting this right, on Facebook at Weekly Dharma Gathering. Weekly Dharma, you're going to find it. So thank you very much also to everyone for having shown up tonight. I appreciate it.
Okay, everybody, till next